Welcome, everyone, to Odds and Ends Life, Entertainment, Theater, and the Arts. I am Andrew Kozlowski, and with me is my good friend and world-class bass player, music producer, and my co-host for the show, Mr. Cool himself, Mr. Clyde Bullard.
What's
Clyde, how
happening?
are you tonight? What's happening, brother?
Oh man, I'm doing good, and I'm very excited about this segment tonight because I have not seen Michael Fitzpatrick in a long time. Now we call ourselves brothers because his birthday is exactly on the same day as my birthday. Now I'm not going to reveal how old we are,
Yeah, okay.
but I've never met any other man in the world that has the same birth date as I do. So that kind of co-joins us. More than
Mm-hmm.
that, also, he is the most incredible cellist that I have ever witnessed in my life. And I've seen a
Yes.
lot of great cellists and musicians. This
Yeah,
cat is out of sight. Now, I want to say two more things. He
Mhm.
was the personal musician who traveled with the Dalai Lama, okay? And he was also the recipient of the Prince Charles Award.
Yes, we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Very special. This guy is going to be a true treat for everybody watching tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is just a small taste of this truly special artist, the amazing Michael Fitzpatrick. Gio, let's see the video. Ladies and gentlemen, American cellist and composer, the founder, chairman, and artistic director of Millennium Music, Mr. Michael Fitzpatrick. Michael, are you there? Michael, welcome to Odds
Hey,
and Ends, Life, Entertainment, Theater, and the Arts.
yes, my longtime brother. I told him I've never met a man in the world whose birthday is exactly the same as mine. Now, I'm not going to tell the people how old we are, but that co-joins us. And I was also telling him, honestly, that I've never seen another cellist in my life, and I've seen a lot, that is more amazing than you are.
Thank you, man.
Really, I mean, you really blew me away. The sounds I was hearing, your technique, or whatever you're doing.
we
Uh,
don't we don't really know.
Well, I certainly double up what Clyde is saying, but also I find the feeling that you put into your music is what's very, very special.
Thank you.
So we're going to try to give everybody that's watching tonight a little history of you, and
Okay.
of course we'll talk about your music and some of the great things you've been doing. We know that music was in your life since you were a young man.
That's right.
Tell us what it was like. You were born in Columbus, Ohio, right?
Well,
You had Catalonian, Irish, Ukrainian, what else? French and Polish descent.
good memory.
All right. I think your
wow.
grandma was a concert pianist.
She was.
Okay, and then somebody else was the head of the Israel Philharmonic. What was
Her right. So she was a child prodigy. Apparently, she sat down at age 4 and just started playing.
Wow.
really?
This would have been in Louisville, Kentucky, 1920s. Okay, maybe
Wow.
even before. She then, at age 10, apparently had her own radio show. Okay, I don't even know what
Get
that
out of
means.
here.
And then at age 14, she became the pianist with the Louisville Orchestra, which was at that point the only orchestra in the world that had been specifically formed to commission new compositions from like cutting edge composers. That was their signature thing. And everybody in the world knew Louisville Orchestra because of that. And Rose, my grandmother, had a photographic memory. She had a photograph. She had a, yeah, eidetic, I think is the phrase, ear.
Mhm.
She had everything she heard, she remembered instantly. And she also, for example, was a life master in bridge. So she could run patterns like nobody's business. So she would sit at the back of the orchestra and think, we're talking 1930s, right?
Oh, man.
Weird time.
Yeah.
And the
Yes.
conductor, Robert Whitney, they're getting these new compositions hot off the press, and this is experimental stuff. Okay,
Wow.
Right.
it was like Schoenberg-esque, and then they would give Rose the score, and then if one of the trumpet players couldn't play the part because he couldn't figure out what the rhythm was, or they needed a fill, he would say, "Rose, can
Show
you
him.
play us?" And then she would just go brum. Okay.
My goodness.
Then her real claim to fame, though, was as an accompanist, right? She wanted to be this. She wasn't a soloist type. She wanted to be the accompanist, and piano accompanists could also be vocal coaches, right? Because they needed.
Sure.
So if you go back and you look at the Metropolitan Opera 30s and 40s and 50s, one of the top stars was Jan Peerce, Persce, who was also a cantor, right?
Mhm.
And Rose was his vocal coach and pianist. So that was crazy enough. If I didn't
Wow.
know this as a kid, she was Rose, right? She was playing,
Right.
she was accompanying me. Then I learned from her at a certain point, it was almost like, I don't know if that they were trying to keep anything from me. I don't know. It's just sort of, she said, do you know who our Polish relative is? And I was like, you mean Uncle Joe? She's like, no. And she said, he was a man named Bronislaw Huberman. I said, I don't know who that is. She said, well, you need to find out.
Hmm.
And because he was the greatest Polish violin soloist of all time. Like he was the Babe Ruth, right? And then when the Second World War, it was clear what was coming. In
Right.
1934, 35, he took all of his personal savings and he'd amassed a small fortune, and he raised money, and he rescued 1,000 Jews, the greatest string players of Eastern Europe that were Jewish, and he got them out.
Beautiful.
Passports, the whole thing, and that
Beautiful.
became the Israel Philharmonic.
Wow.
That's some story.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's amazing. Now, your father was a professor, right?
correct, of art
Okay.
at the University of Kentucky in Lexington.
What was
So I
mom?
grew up-
Mom was doing what at that time?
Mom's specialty was in early childhood education.
Okay,
Which
so she was an
we didn't know-
educator.
Right. But she saw back in 1973 that there was going to be a problem of working mothers having to go to work, and then who's going to take care of the kids? So she pioneered after school daycare and then decided, well, I'll just make a PBS movie, because how difficult can that be to make a movie? Right. And so she made a film called Who's Taking Care of Our Kids?
What? Really?
Yeah. And it was so far ahead of its time that people were like, oh, everything's fine. But now look where we are, right?
Yes.
Unreal. And then your sister.
That's
this
right.
Is, it never ends,
Well,
Clyde.
there's two sisters.
Well, okay. Why don't you
Wow.
tell me about your two sisters?
So my older sister, who's you're going to reference, she was principal violist of the
Right.
Barcelona Symphony, and now she's assistant principal. She doesn't have a forward kind of personality, right? So she was happy just to kind of, at a certain point, you're playing in an orchestra, you just want to kind of ease back in the chair.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then my younger sister, Tamara, who's in Brooklyn, is an extraordinary photographer, and at one point was at the White House as the intern photographer, and then worked her way up to special assistant photographer on special assignment, and covered the ceremonies with Clinton and King Hussein and Rabin, and the peace signings. I mean, an historic time capsule moment. So she learned a lot being in that environment. So then when the Dalai Lama came along, I know I'm jumping, but she had already been through security protocol stuff that she was ready, right? She knew how to maneuver. So she's been my photographer for every Dalai Lama event since then, and everything else.
Wow.
It's
Now,
amazing
Michael,
stuff.
I wanted to ask you a question, Michael.
Yeah.
Out of all the musicians in the world that the Dalai Lama could have chosen, why you? How did that happen?
Sure, it's a great question. And there's a logical answer. I was on my way to Hollywood with rock and roll dreams, my Peter Frampton hair, which would have rivaled yours, Clyde.
Okay.
Well, you were brothers.
I had it, man.
Okay.
And let's just say that the plan needed some fine tuning. So I had to sort of stop along the way. I'd been in New York City up to that point, right?
Okay.
Back in late. Okay. So I thought, well, maybe I'll just stop back in my old Kentucky home and regroup. Okay.
Okay.
And I'm regrouping and I'm regrouping. And finally, my parents say to me, what's your plan? I'm like, it's a very good question. What is my plan? And right about that time, I got a phone call out of the blue. This is 1994 at this point, saying the Dalai Lama is coming to spend 6 days at the Abbey of Gethsemane Monastery in Kentucky. Why? Because of his friendship with the famous Catholic monk and writer Thomas Merton, who had influenced the 60s generation. He was, apparently I learned from Ambassador Andrew Young, he was Dr. Martin Luther King's influence that caused Dr. King to go global on nonviolence.
Is that right?
see.
I didn't know that.
Right?
That's very
heavy
good.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
Okay, big time, right?
Okay.
Merton had gone to meet the Dalai Lama in 68, thinking, how do they do it from an Eastern perspective? They were both suspicious of each other because there had been that hadn't happened before.
Right.
And when they met, they basically recognized themselves staring into their eyes. So they made a pact that they were going to spend the rest of their lives working together to bring East and West together. And look, this is 68. Vietnam is on fire.
Yes.
Assassinations is a horrible time. And Merton gets electrocuted in a freak accident
Whoa.
3 weeks after meeting the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama is devastated. all these years later, he comes to pay homage to Merton at his home and says, let's convene the leading Eastern and Western monastics, so monks and nuns from the traditions.
Yes.
Let's have a powwow, a 6-day powwow. And some brilliant person on the committee, and this was like Vatican line and Office of His Holiness the Dalai Lama of Tibet, like, okay. Somebody said, yeah, maybe some background music, maybe some music, right?
Okay.
And I got the call.
Okay.
Inviting me to come provide the music.
What did you play?
Well, that was exactly what I wanted to know. What do they want, right? So I went and I visited with the representatives, and I said, help me understand how this is structured over these 6 days, and what do you need? And so they said, well, we have a mass, a Marian mass to Ave Maria. I said, well, they said, do you know the Ave Maria? I don't think I said, is the Pope Catholic? I knew they did.
Wow.
But I was like, sure. And they were like, well, what about a mass for the beautiful people of Tibet that have suffered injustice in some type of genocide? I said, I always wanted to arrange Maurice Ravel's Pavane, right, which they always call Say for a Dead Princess, right? And I said, how about that? They said, could you arrange it? And I said, yes, I could. By the time that conversation finished, I thought I was going to play once, maybe twice, right? They needed 9 fill slots. So I had some, Johann Sebastian Bach, I had this, and I dreamed it. And then it took 2 years of planning to then arrive to this convergence. Wow. I didn't know the Dalai Lama. I didn't have any experience of him before.
Right.
I didn't know what to expect. And I had my physical therapist, Janie Blakemore, she could drive a Mack truck through downtown at 80 miles an hour, whistling, whatever, without thinking. I said, well, do you have any advice? He goes, keep your mouth shut.
Okay.
Probably very smart.
It was really smart. Like you just go there with your cello. Don't try and do anything. You just go there with your cello.
Yeah, speak with your music. Yeah.
Speak with your music. And this of course was before phones with cameras, and I had a camera and I brought it, but I basically left it in my room. I wasn't taking pictures I was playing the cello.
Right.
So we get to the end of the 6 days with the Dalai Lama, and it was clear. And mind you, I didn't know who these people were, but I was clear, this is the Super Bowl.
Right.
Right? And there was so much light and love coming out of these folks. And then when I would play, the amount of silence that they live in filled, it's not like we're at the Javits Center. It's not like we're at Town Hall. Right. We're in a sacred monastery built over a Native American ceremonial Cherokee region.
Wow.
Heavy vibe. It was clear that as superstars they were, when the Dalai Lama came into the room, the whole energy changed, right? Like,
now, how did it change? In what way?
In a way I had never seen physically on my outside perception. I had had experiences musically up to that point that were like mystical, where I could feel it change inside of me as I was playing, before I met the Dalai Lama, right? So I knew what it felt like because it would come over me.
Right.
I saw that happen when he came into the room. I felt it, right? First, but I saw it, and I was like, wow, he lives in that energy. When I'm lucky, I can get to it. Right. And at that point, I hadn't figured out how to bring myself into that space every time I played, right? It would come and go. And so what happened is I phase locked with him because he was holding, I'm sure it was like if you played with Miles Davis, you walked on that stage, you figured it out pretty quick or you were gone.
Right. Damn right.
And then you went on the carpet ride and you got to go because you had a model, you had the example. So in the final day, up until then, I'd been about, 30 feet away, 50 feet. I was back, right? Off to the side, whatever. But on the final day, it was the tribute memorial tribute to Thomas Merton. Okay. Right. This is when it all comes together. And I do what they tell me, right? They were like, please come with us. Please sit here. I'm like, so I sit down. Now we're in the giant Abbey Church. If you can go to compassionrising.com.
Okay.
And you'll see that's a whole tableau of all of these images. It's all there. Right?
How many people were there? How many people were there?
50.
What?
Nobody got in. The local press were banned. The local philanthropists were banned. The local who's and who's were banned.
That's interesting.
They didn't want any nonsense. This was not a show. It wasn't a spectacle.
Right.
The only team that they let in was PBS's, at that point, it was the News Hour with Jim Lehrer. Right? Okay. So they covered it. Now, we know we've done some events in our lives. And so, you know, you're mindful of all of the moving pieces because somehow you're all working together, right? So they bring me in and they say, please sit here. Now I'm looking up at the stained glass, the vaulted ceiling is 80 feet up, cross beams, echo. And I look to my right and there's a lectern, right? And in front of this lectern is flowers and a silk white scarf and a portrait of Thomas Merton that I recognize because my godmother, as a child growing up in Lexington, her late husband, they were best friends with Merton. Again, I found out that was Victor's portrait of Merton. So now I'm like, whoa, man. And I was like, well, if I'm sitting here and the lecturn's there, that means that at some point the Dalai Lama is coming to the lectern, right? So I was like, all right, dude, you gotta lock in. Right? So I'm sitting there with my cello, and I'm the odd man out, right? I'm the cello player person, right? At this point, the Dalai Lama and I still hadn't made eye contact with him because there just hadn't been, but now I'm realizing this is the moment, right? So I hear rustles from the back of the room. And again, Andrew, it feels like a wind. It's a rumble. It's like, and so I did the old, like, you know, sort of like, you know, like I didn't like go like that, but I kind of looked back and I was like, that's him. So I thought, as he comes by me, this is I'm gonna have the moment. And as he got closer, everything went into slow motion, right? And then it was just like, and he just looked at me. He just laughed. It was awesome. Like, I see you, man, right? And then he went past me, and then we're back in like real time. I'm sitting there. Other people said some stuff, and now he comes up. And now I'm sitting right next to him as he's standing at the lectern. And I am holding on. The energy field is just the winds are blowing. And he says, I will remember my meeting with Thomas Merton till the end of my life. I will remember him till my last breath. And I make a commitment to fulfill his wish. We must fulfill his wish. And at that point, it sounded like 1,000 buffalo just rumbled by. Right? The whole ground shook. And then he started to take his leave, which was my cue then, and I played the slow movement from the fifth suite by Johann Sebastian Bach, the Sarabande, that Pablo Casals had always played. It's almost Buddhist chant-like.
Yes.
Right? And you see on PBS's footage, the entourage and the Dalai Lama, they start to flow out, and it's just like something out of a Fantasia, right? So that was how it started. And from there, 99, 2000, I sat with him. That then led to our doing the recording in the largest cave in the world with the Tibetan monks and the Trappist monks, because they said to me at the end, would you be willing to do a musical recording, something profound happened here. We're just monks and nuns. We don't know how to get the word out. And we're clear that the music, it would be the most powerful way to transmit the actual feeling of the consciousness of compassion. And I'm astonished. I'm like, wow, they really get it. Like,
Wow.
none of my kids, like, they really get it. So I thought, well, you can't do that in a recording studio in New York. That's not a Hollywood production. Where do you do that? And could I even do it? Because at this point, I'm clear they're asking for the world premiere CD of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And it's like, okay. A vision flashes in my mind's eye of Mammoth Cave, where we used to go on high school field trips. 350 miles of tunnels, right?
Oh.
Get lost down there, right? And I saw this vision of Tibetan monks and Trappist monks chanting together with fires lit, torches, like a scene from the Bible. Powerful. And I thought, well, they'll never go for that. I'll pitch it, and then I'll go out on this Broadway tour I just got invited to do, and then I'll get out to Hollywood. That's right. So I said, look, I'm only going to do this under one condition. Like Huckleberry Finn all of a sudden. And they said, what? I said, you have to let me record it in Mammoth Cave. And they said, that's a great idea. Let's do it. Okay. So that was the trigger for everything that's happened since the being able to bring Muhammad Ali together with the Dalai Lama, 2003, United States Capitol West Lawn, 2013, and on and on and on. So there was a reason. There's been an ongoing collaboration musically that is part of the last 23 years.
Yeah, that's pretty exciting. And talking about, you are also the music director for Muhammad Ali's Humanitarian Awards.
That's right.
That you're putting together some powerful people here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The music is putting together some power.
Well, that was my point. The gift.
That's it.
The gift.
That's it.
Were you spiritually minded before you met the Dalai Lama?
For sure.
Okay.
I had a what we would call in before they called it the zone. Back in the 80s, they would have called it a peak experience, like Abraham Maslow would have called it a peak experience.
Sure.
Right? But athletes know you're having a peak experience. You're going into the zone. Jordan was the perfect example. He's moving through dimensions, right? And so that started happening to me at an early age, 17. I had a mystical awakening experience on a concert stage in North Carolina, soloing with an orchestra, and
An astral projection, some kind.
No, that's not what it was. There are so many. I guess it depends on which tradition you reference, but in a certain, like a let's call it a Gnostic Christian tradition, they would refer to the still small voice. Now, in my limited experience, but in the gospel Christian tradition, one would say, I heard the voice, or the voice came to me.
Right.
Or,
you became the music.
The calling.
I saw the light. The call came, but it came in as an energy, not as like an idea. And then when it took over my system, I'm steering the ship. I'm like playing this really difficult concerto with the orchestra. And I thought, well, that's a nice phenomenon, right? But I how do I know that this is real, right? Maybe I'm imagining. I don't know, right? And it's like people that have seen UFOs. I've never seen one, but they're like, they said they saw a UFO. But you have to wonder, what am I seeing a UFO? What is that? So I thought, I don't know what to do with this. But then I felt the energy melted me, basically. It dissolved me in gold light. It was like a funnel cloud of golden energy and light came in through the auditorium, and it arrived. I felt it, like everything like went, and then I felt it move through the cello, and I heard it change the sound of the cello. I'm like, yeah, this is real.
I was going to ask you that next question. How did this acceptance of the call, let's say,
right?
How did it affect your music?
Well, it changed everything. It was like, what is it? Amazing Grace. I was blind and now I see.
Yeah.
Yes.
Up till that moment, I was a cello player, and I wasn't great, right? But I had worked really hard at it, and I was playing at a certain level of excellence, right?
Right.
And I was clear I was going to get better. But when that happened, it was like at the crossroads, and it's like a grand crossing, or I took the fork when I came to the fork in the road. I took the fork, right?
Wow.
And because I had evidence, I heard it changed the sound of the cello. I play with my eyes closed because I always felt it was easier to tune out and to tune in with my hearing and my feeling state, right? So I finished the piece, like explosion in the audience of clapping and cheering and whatever. And I'm dazed, and I walk off the stage. I come back, I don't know how many bows happened. And then I'm like, oh, wow, I just had my mind blown. I'm 17 years old. It was 1982, okay? And my parents drove down. They had a flat tire on the drive coming. I got there just as I was walking out on stage. I see mom and dad slip out in the front camera, and dad had the Pentax camera. And he's like, right? My cello teacher, who had been at Juilliard under the great Leonard Rose, right? He was there, but there was an elder couple who had come to all of my performances that summer, and they were like, remember, like, what is it, Della Reese, Touched by an Angel? They were like that. They would just sort of appear.
Right.
Now I'm backstage, and they came up to me, and they said, "We saw what happened."
Whoa.
And before I could say anything, they said, "Everyone saw what happened."
Uh-oh.
So I was like, oh, so there's a visual footprint to it as well. So when I met the Dalai Lama, that was confirmation that he lives in that energy field, right? Of the totality. And so that was then the second moment when I learned how to I was like having that image of Back to the Future where Michael J. Fox has got to get there and the lightning is coming and he's got to, it's like, and you keep trying and you're trying to ground it. And finally you're like, you've got it in your own heart. Right.
Yes.
And so from that point, then when we went into the cave, the whole point was to deny anyone having an advantage, right? Nobody could say, well, I've done a lot of projects in the best studio in New York, and we're all in the womb of the earth now together. We had our ears, right? And we had the interior space of our planet. And so then this next series of sounds started rising up. And so at that point, I had already left the classical music world by 86, because I could see it was going in a direction that had nothing to do with the world that we live in now.
It was limiting to you, right?
Thank you. That's a more courteous way to say it.
Yeah.
But there was no path. So, but when I got around the Tibetan monks and I heard the way they were doing microtones, they were pitch bending pitches. So I was like, man, I'd like to try that on my cello. So I started finding these other ways of playing the cello. So Clyde, by the time you and I met in 2000, right, I had at least started opening up my palette of non-traditional classical cello sounds to make I wanted the instrument to speak, right? So all of those factors were part of the, it's like, with the pearl, it's like an irritant. They were irritants to make me shape something new.
Right.
And it was difficult, just as artistically. I don't ever really talk about that, but it was difficult. And,
Right.
and the amount of energy that was coming in, it's like, how do you channel that?
Did you have anything inside of you that resisted it at first?
The only resistance was, people would say, so how do you make a living? Or they would say, do you make a
Yeah.
living doing this? And I would say, you call that a living? I mean, it was great. Like the best of Jewish humor. It was like, it was tough because which call was I going to answer?
Mm.
I turned down, I can share this because this is New York and this is music stuff. At one point in the way it all unfolded, I became Bruce Lundvall, head of Blue Note and EMI,
Oh, I know it. Yeah.
became my mentor
Wow.
and friend. And by some weird divine coincidence, his son was the recording engineer in the Cave. But I didn't know Bruce at that point. Right? There was a whole weird series of like impossible
Things that just came together.
It clicked, and then it kept clicking. And I wish somebody had said, "Hey, kid, don't count on it. It might stop clicking. What's your plan?" Right? But I was just going with it. So at one point, Bruce tries to hire me as his head of A&R for Capitol Records.
He was
And I'm
also
like-
at Columbia as well. You know that.
He was a Columbia.
Earth, Wind, and Fire. Earth, Wind,
with
and Fire.
Miles.
Everybody. That
He has the letter from Miles framed in that case. And I was like, what's in the case, Bruce? That's when the old Blue Note offices were there, right? The
Yes.
2 levels with the balcony and the piano and the glass. That was a cool spot. I was like, what's in the case, Bruce? He was like, go take a look. So I go over and I look into the case, and there's a letter that had about as much typed writing as that. And then that's the signature. And it says, "Dear Bruce, now that you signed me, are you going to sign any other black artists?"
Ah. Mm.
Like throwing the gauntlet down. So anyway, I turned Bruce down and I said, I really appreciate that. Number one, I wouldn't have had the first idea what I was supposed to do, right? I don't know that world per se, but I was like, I got to play the cello, right? So the struggles were in, remember the scene in, is it the second Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think, when Harrison Ford's being chased and he gets to the edge of the thing in the cave and they're coming in and he closes his eyes and the bridge, he steps out and the bridge appears.
Yeah. Sure.
That's been going on a long time. Okay.
So you've been able to successfully sustain a career all these years doing your special brand of emoting through music.
You got it. Right.
I understand you're the founder and the artistic director of Millennium Music. Tell me a
That's
little
right.
about that.
Sure. Well, that came before meeting the Dalai Lama.
Okay.
And before the Cave.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been living in Chicago at the time doing they called it a performer's certificate. It was basically if you wanted to get a doctorate, but you didn't want to write a dissertation, you would get a performer's certificate. And there was a great cello professor there, Hans-Jürgen Jensen, who was just like the mad professor from Back to the Future, right? Yeah. And he was such a great character. And there was one thing in my sound there was just this one thing in my vibrato that I couldn't figure out, right? And somebody said, he's got the answers. So I was at Northwestern as an undergrad in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So I got in a car one day, and I was still in Kentucky at that point. I drove to Chicago, 7-hour drive. I pull up to the old practice building where I knew where the faculty offices were. And I go up and I knock on his door. He doesn't know who I am. It's just a knock. And he opens the door and I say, Professor Jensen, I said, I'm Michael Fitzpatrick, a not so distinguished alum of this fine institution. And I said, and I'm here to find the golden sound. And he goes, oh yeah, come in. So during that year, there's that great Patti Smith song, My Blakean Year. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm. I'm like, okay, I'm still trying to get to Hollywood from there, right? I'm like on the move west at least. Right? In 2 lessons, he gave me the secret. It was a weird exercise, right? I got it. So I was sort of done, but I had this year to finish, right? So my graduate assistantship was to create Northwestern's outreach program for string players, to take healing music to schools, elderly care facilities, the homeless, right? And I put all that together. And then I thought, hey, maybe I should just create a company. That way I could then somehow maybe move the music vision through that, and then have it founded on two things: to serve the underserved with healing music, and to serve the world audience with a music for now. So we came up with this mantra. The motto came to me: tuning the planet. Tuning the planet, right?
Yes.
And then the mantra was to describe millennium music: a synchronization of visionary musicians, reinventing the music of the past, remembering the music of the future, and tuning the planet to the music of now. Bam.
Great.
Okay.
Great.
Filed the incorporation. We're now in our 25-year anniversary. And it was from that, then Millennium Music produced all of the cave recording. Right? It's basically produced everything.
Now, how did this Prince Charles Award happen?
Another strange one. So we're in Spoleto, Italy, right? The world famous Spoleto Festival of Two Worlds, founded by Giancarlo Menotti, Saint of Bleecker Street, A Mall and the Night Visitors, Pulitzer Prize. Right? My now longest time closest friend in the classical music world, Maestro Stephen Mercurio, was the music director and orchestra conductor. And so he brought me in as his principal cellist, and the first summer, right, 93. And I had a solo trio as well, and I loved it. Spoleto, Italy is like magic, right?
Sure.
So he's like, yeah, you're thinking about coming back in 94, right? I'm like, yeah, man, let's do it again. So word got to me by a pianist colleague of ours. He said, oh yeah, I talked to Steve, and he said, you know, you might want to take a look at the such and such symphony we're doing. There's a cello solo in it. And I thought, okay, usually in an orchestra piece, it's a cello solo, you know, it's eight notes, right? 10 notes, and you figure it out. Right? So I didn't look at the thing. I didn't look at it. I fly over, land in Italy, settle in, first rehearsal, 9 a.m., right? We're in the auditorium, the gymnasium of the auditorium. And I'm like, well, let me find the cello solo. I'm like flipping into these pages, right? To like find the 8 notes. Second movement. First page. Orchestra plays something. Cello alone, the entire first page.
Whoa.
And it's like in Sanskrit. And then I'm like, oh, this is not good. I turn the page, and then there's another whole page. And I'm like, oh no, this is really not a good
And you haven't practiced a thing.
I don't know the piece.
Oh
I've
my
never
God.
heard it. So I'm like, oh my God, how long does this thing go on? And I get to the end, the whole last page. There's other stuff that's out, and then it's back. And I'm like, oh. And we're 8 days out.
Uh-oh.
So here we get to the first movement is this bombast. So this is, I'll give you the piece because you'll be able to hear it. John Carigliano, who did the score for the Red Violin, scored Altered States, right? This is John's Symphony Number 1, and each movement is one of his friends that has passed of AIDS.
Wow. Okay.
The second movement is the slow movement. So the cello is the lament. So we get through the first movement. It's impossible. Nobody knows it. Nobody can read it. Oh, Steve is the master. He's like a traffic cop at Midtown. He's like, hold and then go. And we're like, ah. Get to the second movement, and the orchestra does something, right? Like sort of a whispering murmur of sound. And then Steve turns and he just gives me this kind of like casual cue.
You're on.
You're on. And I gave it my best, right? We read through it. No harm, no foul. the rehearsal ends, and I go up to him, and I said, he goes, how do you like that cello solo? I said, that wasn't a solo. I said, that was a whole concerto. I said, thanks for telling me in advance. He goes, I figured you could handle it. It's like really cool, right? So the next morning, the alarm went off at 6 a.m. and I went up to the third floor of the opera house where the opera singers had their dressing rooms. Nobody was there.
Right.
And for 4 hours, I did the vibrato exercises that I had learned from Hans-Jürgen Jensen,
Right.
because
Previously.
it had to be, it was so distilled, man, right? And it got better slowly, incrementally, and now it's the big night. It's the European premiere. Well, it wasn't the world premiere, but it's the European premiere. Giancarlo Menotti is there in the box. The ambassadors are there in the box. All of Italy's royalty are in the opera house. And the moment comes, and Steve gives me the cue. I'll find this video. I'll send it to you guys, because it was one of those nights. And man, the same thing happened when I was 17.
Oh, that light comes in or whatever.
Right.
Uh-oh.
I just went. Okay. So the next day, we're into rehearsal. We're on to the next program. Steve says, stay after. I'm like, okay. I'm like, did I do something? Am I in trouble again?
Right.
And he says, Giancarlo Menotti wants to give you the Prince Charles Award.
Whoa.
I said, that sounds great. What is it? And he said, every year it is awarded to the outstanding musician of the Spoleto Festival. He said, but it's never gone to an artist who was both a soloist like yourself, but it was also a member of the orchestra. So this is rather unprecedented. And I said, well, that's awesome. I said, so what do I have to do? And he said, don't do anything, right? And he said, don't tell anyone until we've got confirmation from Giancarlo, because sometimes he was getting up there in years, right? And he said, and don't tell anyone because your friends might be jealous and envious. And I'm like, really? Why? Like, I didn't understand the politics. So I didn't say anything. And I didn't hear anything. Okay, so the next night was the midnight jazz concert back at the Opera House. And we're doing like this George Antheil piece from 1912 that was like, wild stuff. And I was once again up in one of the opera singers' dressing rooms, just using it as my warm-up space. I was just like playing along. It was like 10 till midnight. Right? The door was open because I wanted it to be open because technically it was for the opera singers. Right? And I'm playing along, and all of a sudden I see going by the door is none other than Giancarlo Menotti.
Wow.
And his son Chip. And they're going to the box, right? And Giancarlo looks in, and Chip looks in. I'm in there playing. We stare at each other, and then they keep going. And I'm like, well, obviously I'm not getting the Prince Charles Award. And then reverse, Giancarlo backs up. He looks back into the dressing room, and he says, are you the cellist? And I said, well, I play the cello. And he said, yes, you are the cellist. Congratulations, you've won the Prince Charles Award. Be at the awards ceremony tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. And the rest is history.
Wow.
Okay.
That's pretty crazy.
I want to ask you another question, too. Another question, slightly different.
Please.
What is your prognosis on the history of musicians and classical music moving forward? I've heard that sometimes they're struggling to find audiences.
I think, Hendrix is coming to mind. If you look at the way Hendrix burst onto the scene, right? He changed the channel. We have to change the channel. Who else changed the channel? Beethoven changed the channel. Who else changed the channel? Johann Sebastian Bach changed the channel. All these guys were channel changers.
Yes.
And then as it got commodified and let's just say corporate interest, Steve Wozniak, who co-founded Apple with Steve Jobs, said, the day the music died and it became about the money was when the suits in the towers, saw 400,000 people jam the highway going to Woodstock. And they didn't at that point understand how massive the audience was. Right. So the whole revelation of the 60s, how is it possible that all of that great music erupted then? Well, it was in the air. And as Alan Parsons, my now dear friend and collaborator, my hero, right? Engineer of the Beatles, Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon, and the Alan Parsons Project. Huh?
Yay.
I said, how is it that everyone, all these great songs? And Alan just looked at me and goes, because we were all making music with each other. We were all hanging out together, right? I was like, right. That makes total sense. So in the sea change moment that we're at, the seas are rocky, the whole planet. It's all messed up now. It was already messed up in terms of the way music was no longer fulfilling its function as the healing agent of peace and love in the 60s. That then could guide and be the soundtrack for the movement. Right? All you got to do, we just looked at Dr. King.
Yes.
And it was because Coretta was a musician who studied music in the childhood hometown that I grew up in, Andrew. After I moved from Columbus, we moved to Yellow Springs, Ohio. And I just recently learned that Coretta Scott King went to Antioch University and was a music major.
I didn't know that. I never knew that.
Right.
Did you, Andrew? Did you know that, Andrew?
I didn't know that either. No.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
So look at her influence on Dr. King for the music. And it's very interesting that Dr. King picked a white group, Peter, Paul, and Mary, to sing. I want to make sure
March on Washington.
Right. Well, the March on Washington, I just wanted to make sure I had the right song. It was Blowing in the Wind that Peter told me this story, Peter Yarrow. And this is the story Peter told me. He said after they sang Blowing in the Wind, he said they stepped back from the lectern where they were. He said he and Mary were holding hands, trembling, just shaking. As Dr. King stepped up to the podium, they said they could see his script. They could see the speech, and there was no, as far as I understand it, the dream reference isn't in the speech. And as Peter said it, Dr. King started, and he just started the speech, and they're standing there shaking, and standing behind them, I had to double check this. Would it have been Marian Anderson? Or, no. It was another legendary singer. I'll have to double check this.
Not Odetta,
Not Odetta.
Not Odetta, no.
And not Marian Anderson. Oh, man. It'll come back to me.
Mahalia Jackson?
Thank you. That's a save.
Okay.
Mahalia Jackson shouted out, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream." And Peter said he felt it come over his right shoulder and hit Dr. King in the back, and that's when it started.
Okay.
So it was never intended it wasn't written as part of the original.
Exactly. Okay.
Isn't
So
that
now
amazing?
think back to that speech.
Wow.
Right.
That's one of the greatest speeches of all time.
Right. But it was jazz. Right? Okay. So in the sea change, but I'm still struck by that Dr. King chose Peter, Paul, and Mary, right, to represent him for that moment. It's like, what a trip.
Yeah.
That's so non-obvious.
Right.
Okay. So music then got moved over into, as Tom Petty said, into the Great Wide Open. The A&R man didn't hear a single. The future is wide open. That's why he wrote the song then, The Last DJ. Right? Okay. So it got moved over into the plastic products section that Silicon Valley figured out. Well, they could I'll just say it. They could just borrow it and offer it for free to everyone while they ripped the artist off, and YouTube and all the rest. They took it. If you haven't seen it, Don Henley's testimony to Congress about this, he just nails them. And he said the tech world stole our music, at which they now refer to as that the musicians are content creators.
Mm.
And he was
That's
not in a good mood.
Yes.
Okay. So we can't change that because that's the machine, right? That's why Pink Floyd wrote Welcome to the Machine, right? What we can change, though, is the dial.
Mm.
We can change the channel.
Right,
And
right.
if the legacy is all of the greats were channel changers, well, who's going to step up now? And if you don't step up, you need to step out of the way, as Mr. Dillon sang, because the times they are changing. So why we're having this conversation, I'm really clear. Like when you reached out to me, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a cosmic call. This is my friend Eric, who's a great double bass player, principal bass of St. Louis Symphony. He was like, these are what I call cosmic checkpoints. That's cool. So we're at a musical cosmic checkpoint. And so going back to Dr. King, when he talks about when the history books are written, it will say there lived a great people that injected new meaning and dignity and hope, right? The music has to reconstitute itself. And if it doesn't sound good, right? If it doesn't have a great melody, and if it doesn't have some really meaningful lyrics that can be simple, like the Beatles, a lot of the Beatles lyrics were real simple. Or Jimmy, right? Purple Haze, right? All that stuff, man. It's like we need something to hook into so we can journey together as a planetary species.
Or Imagine, John Lennon's Imagine. Come on, that's profound.
It's prophetic.
Hey,
right?
That's
prophetic.
Right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So why not do whatever we all can to create, well, it's in the Bible, we will create new songs to the Lord, right? Or Isaiah, hear and your soul shall live, or the Upanishads, the ear is the way. Zen, can you hear the rushing of the river? That is the way.
Right.
Wow, it's like, oh, aha. We're such a visually dominated society now. And because of the way the global chessboard is moving, we've all now had to retreat into our interior space. What better time to stop running around? Because we have to.
Yeah.
And it's like, let's dig deep, man.
Michael, the foundation that we're involved with, Clyde and I started 2002, I think it was. We actually incorporated it. But the Josephine Foundation, its premise is about changing the world with the teenagers. I mean,
I love that.
We use young people. We did a mission in Kenya, in East Pokot.
Wow.
And in Kenya, the problem was that it was okay traditionally to dismember females,
right?
As you know, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So I worked with the Holy Ghost Fathers of Ireland.
Wow.
To get access, because they were the missionaries in the area in Africa. And we used music, liturgical music, some that I had written to get in.
Wow. Okay.
And we found out that we had to change the culture at the high school level, or what we call the high school level.
I see. Sure.
And we built schools in an area where it was rocks for 3 hours of driving on rock to get to. And for the first time, kids that age were going to school together, and they were taught to respect each other, to sing, to dance together.
Cool.
We used music to bring them together.
Wow,
and these kids started to graduate, and they went to Nairobi to university, where they now were carrying these principles with them.
Beautiful.
So now you had doctors coming out of there and lawyers coming out of there, and you had all kinds of different things, people that could change the culture.
Right.
We couldn't reach the old timers that were set in their ways.
That's right.
Or divided amongst certain things like we have today, as you mentioned, this divided society. Clyde and I have hours of conversation about it.
I'm sure.
Music is the international healer.
Yes.
So
it can be.
Yeah, well, it has to be given an opportunity. So, Michael, one of the things that I have been a proponent of is music and arts and how it develops young people. I've
Great.
testified in Albany and
Awesome, man.
in Washington about it,
Wow.
and tried to fight the cuts in the
Excellent.
schools.
Oh, fantastic.
What role do you feel the arts play, music plays, in the development of young people? The balance, right? We talk about, it's great, the Dalai Lama, I'm sure balance is a big part of,
That's right.
of an inner person. Music provides that balance. What role do you think it has in the development of young people? How important is it to be part of maybe a necessary part, an essential part of their curriculums?
I think Plato said it 2,000 plus years ago, that the music is at the center of the entire education. It's the sun around which everything else orbits. Okay, because what it does is it develops, it allows the qualities of the soul to come in and be experienced in the human being, in the body, right? I remember as a kid growing up, Yellow Springs, Ohio, and then Lexington, Kentucky. All my black friends, man, they could dance. I'm like fourth grade. I didn't know how to dance. I didn't know. I'd never had the experience of dancing. We didn't have that as in my childhood in Yellow Springs. Now we had music making and we sang songs together. And my music teacher there was like a Joan Baez. She had her guitar. She taught me the first song. We did Bad Bad Leroy Brown, Tie a Yellow Ribbon Around the Old Oak Tree. My musical debut was actually as a child singer in third grade, singing March Went Out Like a Lion from Carousel. That's when I first experienced that kinetic energy. Then I got the cello. But we listened to the Jackson 5, right? That the music was there, but I didn't know how to dance. But when I got to Lexington, like all of my young black friends, they were like, why aren't you dancing? I'm like, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I've been thinking about this a lot because we've all had time to reflect. I can think back to elementary school convocation. My soul sister friends they get up there and it was gospel voices from the black church. It was unbelievable. Yeah. So if you don't have a way to express yourself except through sports, which I love, and I'm a fanatic,
right?
Or your way.
But there
of
are just some people that can't play sports.
That
has
right.
to be remembered too. So,
well, that's exactly right. Yeah. So then you play chess or whatever, right? But without having the opportunity to say, I don't like. I get this a lot when in travels. When you're visiting some place and you're invited to a dinner at somebody's home and they've got kids and they're like, oh, this is Mr. Fitzpatrick. He plays the cello. I don't like the cello. They don't know.
They don't know the
They've
cello.
never had an experience of it.
Right.
And I'm like, oh. And I was like, well, would you guys stick around for one song?
Yeah.
Right? They're like, okay. And then when I play it, then they have an immediate encounter with it. And then they're like, okay, so I think there's a cool hip factor that is coming back in now. And because there's so much, it's mainly crossover jazz cello playing, and Berkeley is doing a great job and all that. Sure. But if we could get it into, this was the whole plan with Suzuki and the Suzuki violin method. Learning by love, right?
Yes.
Beautiful. Yeah. The reason it didn't really work as well as it was intended was because he was not a virtuoso violinist. So, right? And so he got it as far as he could go, but there was also a design flaw in it. And I know because I was raised on it up to a certain point. They called it learning by ear.
Right.
But it was actually memorization by rote.
Yeah, the rote system, Suzuki. But you know something also, the cello was never perceived as an instrument that was used in commercial music. But you had a group called Kansas. Remember them?
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. And then the ELO had a couple cello players.
ELO, right? Of course.
And the Beatles, of course, used it. But it was never. So I'll give you a little pivot here.
Electric Light Orchestra.
Yeah, ELO. Right.
Right, that's right.
So part of what I've been running down a dream on and you know, holding steady at 55. Rock's like, okay, we're staying the speed limit here, folks. Is wow, man, rock and roll dreams. They never went away, even with all the time with the Dalai Lama. It's like, right, but this is all leading to rock and roll dreams.
But how were you going to use a cello and implement it in rock and roll?
Well, it was exactly the question I faced. And I remember when I was a lot younger, I could hear stuff like powerful sounds. I couldn't physically pull them out of the instrument, right? Because unless I didn't have an amp. I didn't think, right. Then I started, Pink Floyd was my conversion because I heard the treatment. So I was like, yeah, man, I want to play like Pink Floyd. But then I thought, right, but I still want more power. I want like Hendrix-like current.
Sure.
What if there's another instrument that's a hybrid, right? Like a Tesla rocket, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so I had a vision. I met this guy on an Amtrak train ride from Maysville, Kentucky to New York, New York, who was a Wall Street guy who had never been on a train ride in his life and had fallen in love, and his fiance was living in wherever he got on the train, Pennsylvania. Struck up a conversation in the lounge car. Turned out he was the guitar player in Rod Stewart's first rock band. Okay, and then made a lot of money. And he said, well, what's your dream? You know, we got 12 hours of train to go. And I said,
right.
I like rock and roll. I'm a Beatles, Hendrix, Pink Floyd kid, right? Mm-hmm. He goes, yeah, but you're going to need more power. I said, yeah. I said, well, why don't, now we're making the plan. Why don't we just like invent a new instrument, right? He goes,
electric cello.
An electric cello. So I sketched it out on the napkin, right? No body, just like a stick, a ski, right? And I remember he gave me his card and he says, you know, when you get the band put together, give me a call and I'll be your manager.
Great.
I was like, awesome. That was 91.
Okay.
1991. One day I'm flipping through Strings magazine, it was a big deal for us. You know, we had our own magazine finally, Strings.
Right. Right.
And I turned the page, man, and there in the upper left corner is the identical instrument of what I saw in my vision. Now, I didn't think, oh, he stole that idea. And it's like somebody else saw the same thing.
Sure.
So I called Eric Jensen Electric Cello, and I said, Mr. Jensen, I would like to buy an electric cello. And he said, do you want a 5-string or a 6-string? And I said, oh, I definitely want a 6-string.
Whoa.
He goes, well, what are you going to use it for? I said, to play lead, not to play backup, the lead instrument. It becomes the Hendrix acts as the driver of the rock and roll band. And at this point, the name of the band had already come to me. It had been given to me in this sort of Beatlesque encounter with someone. Okay. Band name is Vehicle. Okay. Because we're just the vehicle for the music. So he goes, well, if you're going to play lead, you don't want a 6-string, you want a 5-string. I said, no. I want the lows and I want the highs. He said, right, kid, I understand. And you don't want a 6-string. And I said, help me understand. He said, the fingerboard is going to be too wide and the bowing, because of the way the bridge is going to grade, you're going to be running into yourself. He said, you want a 5-string. I said, build me a 5-string. Okay. So that, it requires a new instrument, right?
Sure.
This design vehicle requires a new instrument, vocals, lyrics, which I've been working on since the vocal debut at age 3. I mean, in 3rd grade. Okay. And piecing together along the way, what's the story of our time, right? What's the magical mystery tour now? Mm-hmm. Ooh, so it's really unclear. Yeah. So we need songs that take us places in our imagination and give us simple comfort of, you think of the greatest early Beatles songs, I Want to Hold Your Hand, Love, Love Me Do. And then Yesterday, when it started to turn, when John started to hook in and started to change the channel, to then, too many to choose from. Let It Be, Get Back.
Fool on the Hill.
Fool on the Hill. And Don't Let Me Down.
Sure.
Right? and then across the universe. So it's time
Yeah.
to go across the universe now. Play some funky music, white boy, old fashioned, old school, front of the edge, mix it up, and then take the classical symphonic tradition, which was the rock and roll machine. Imagine, before amplifiers, can you imagine an 85-piece orchestra debuting a Beethoven symphony, or Bach sitting down at the organ every Sunday morning for the new rock cantata?
Right.
People would have been like in the Maxell ad, blown back.
Right.
Right. So we can now, history has gone forward enough. It's like, wow, George Martin was the perfect guy for the Beatles. How about if we added some strings? How about a clarinet?
That's right.
Little
That's right.
trumpet, as opposed to what ELO did, which it got it a
Sure.
little too symphonic. But
Right.
so
now you get your Beatles Magic Mystery Tour.
you got it, man.
Sergeant Pepper's Lonely
That's
Hearts
it.
Club Band. That's all there.
It's all there.
Yeah.
And so now I'm clear. As strange, Thomas Merton had two great lines on top of all the other great things, but one was God moves straight through crooked lines. Right? The other one was champagne's no good unless you drink it all. So do the math.
Hey man, I'm gonna tell you something else. You've given us so much
Awesome, man.
in this conversation. But
Awesome.
you did mention to us
Yeah.
something earlier
Yeah.
that was cleared that you can
Yes.
now divulge. Can
Yes,
you
I
share that
can.
now?
Yes. So I
It's a project he was talking about, remember?
yeah, no, I do remember. I just want to frame this in all of the reverence that we all will accord it. On July 6th,
Mhm.
there is going to be a worldwide broadcast gratitude celebration of people from around the world expressing their great appreciation to His Holiness the Dalai Lama for everything he has brought to humanity. So I got invited a week and a half ago to be the only musician to contribute a musical offering, like a performance video.
Will it be live or just taped or something or what?
It will, as things are nowadays, I guess it will appear live. I mean, it'll go live and probably go Facebook Live. I'll get you all those details.
Please, yeah.
There'll be a trailer it'll start to build momentum. So I thought, what goes back to the question, you're sitting with in a monastery in 1996 and they're like, would you do an album? And you're like, yeah, well, you can't just do that in a recording studio. How to express this in a way that conveys the depth of appreciation. So I can't give away how that revealed itself.
Okay.
But it all ties in with everything we've been talking about. And when I saw it, it was like, sometimes there are revelations, right? In our real lives, we all have them. We all know this. And I think that's part of the weave is like, wait a minute, what if everybody's having revelations, but nobody quite knows that if it's like, okay to say, yeah, man, like I had this revelation, right? And that's the blossoming. And so not if, because it must. There's no if.
Yeah,
Right?
yes.
There's no try,
Right.
do. The music will now rise again and blossom through people's hearts and nourish our nervous systems and our minds
I hope so.
and the actual earth and the land itself. And so I'm now seeing July 6th is a bellwether event in that it will, because they've invited dignitaries from all around the world. Everybody. So think of who loves the Dalai Lama.
Sure.
Everybody whose life he's ever touched.
That's right.
Okay, so it's an extraordinary honor, and it tested me, right? It really forced me to go into who am I?
Serendipitous revelations.
Once again,
That's what it is, man.
that's what it is. You got it. So I no longer am being run by, I'm no longer driven by, I've got to do the concert. in order to change the world to then validate that I was on the right track. I'm like, I know I'm on the right track because I'm at the cello. Mm-hmm. And so now the liberation of what's happening at the instrument, it's like all of those interesting sounds I was going after and these particles and all that stuff. Basically now I've gotten it where it's gone like this, right? And then it's opened this way. And now I'm ready to go to the 5-string electric cello finally, which is on a stand. So I'll play it standing up, right?
Yes.
And I'll do the Peter Gabriel vocal mic.
Yes.
My lyrics are ready. I'll give you just a sample lyric. Again, this was what was tough to edit myself out and not give this away. So this song is called Pauline, the Planetary Dream Collector, right? Also known as Pauline the Dream, right? Pauline, the Planetary Dream Collector, was a friend of mine. She worked the press. She pressed the myth onto scrolls of limestone. She said, planet mind is forming, new sphere in the sky. Planet heart is shining, now it's the time to fly. Right?
Wow.
Pauline worked on Tuesdays from 9 to 5, Wednesdays through Friday. She was charting the divine. On Sunday, she was praying at the Church of the Earth. She finally realized what it's really all worth. She said, Jimmy, planet mind. And then at the junction, the 5-string electric cello then comes in and away we go on a vehicle trip, right? Mm-hmm. And then bring it back in. And that was the one thing, I never talk about this because it's sacrilegious, but that was the one thing that the Beatles never did. They never went on a trip instrumentally.
I see, okay.
They never did it because that wasn't their design. Right? They had maxed out. By the time I'm clear, the reason they blew apart was that was as far as they could go as virtuosos, right? Then Pink Floyd picked up that where they left off, but even Pink Floyd, when they went on the trip, it was a very different, that wasn't Jimmy's trip.
Right.
That was the Pink Floyd glide. But we need the trip now. And so it's like, what would that be? That would be Hendrix Energy and Sonics, Pink Floyd's Glide, and Beatle-esque, the colors, the spectrum colors.
Yes.
Run through a 5-string electric cello, and I've been practicing.
Now, is that stringed up E-A-G-G-C?
E-A-D-G-C.
That's what it is.
Yeah. I had the low F on it when I was working with the Tibetan monks, because that was really cool.
So we are anxiously going to await the details, Michael, of this wonderful project in July.
Thank you.
The only other thing is, what else is on the agenda? Recordings, anything coming up? Or
Yeah, well, right. So now it's like recordings, rock and roll stuff. I have a recording the entire Bach cello suites, the 6 suites for solo cello. And that's like, that's a big project. I have a Beethoven piano and cello cycle that I'm working on with Maestro Stephen Mercurio's incredibly talented wife, Lisa Mercurio, who plays the piano. But before that, she was at Decca and launched the 3 tenors back in the day.
Wow.
Hey, these are powerful musical forces. We want to go back. Remember in the Millennium Music mantra, a synchronization of visionary musicians reinventing the music of the past, not changing it, just reinventing it.
Yeah.
Okay, because that's important. And that goes back to your question about the kids, Andrew. And so how to turn the music back on. And I think really the best way to do any of this stuff is go there, be with them, introduce the new, as Bucky said, and render the old obsolete. That's how.
It's so doggone important.
Okay.
Listen, Michael, I sure do hope you enjoyed visiting with us
That's
tonight.
awesome.
And of course, we're going to want to have you come back and do part
Please.
2 after
Thank
the
you.
July concert. Maybe
Let's do it.
All right?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, a special thanks to Mr. Michael Fitzpatrick.
Thank you.
Michael will be in touch soon. Thanks.
And Mike,
Thank you so much. Yes,
and Mike,
Clyde.
we got to get together, you and I and Andrew, and have dinner and break bread, okay?
No, that's on the agenda.
That's
And
happening.
Andrew has the connectivity to make your vision.
I
come to
caught the
fruition.
cue.
Oh yeah. Okay.
All right,
Awesome.
brothers. Thanks so
beautiful.
much, Michael.
Thank you. Take care.
And good night, and stay bright.
Always. Peace
Listen,
and love.
folks, a special announcement coming for the program. In case you missed it, we want to invite you to a very special tribute that's going to be played over and over again on the Flushing Town Hall Facebook.com page. So you go to www.facebook.com/Flushing Town Hall, and this special tribute that took place this last Friday, June 19th, NEA Jazz Master James Heath. Some of the great musicians that came back to honor and talk about Jimmy, his brother Toothy Heath, and of course Barry Harris, Jimmy Owens, Antonio Hart. Our buddy Clyde was involved in this at Flushing Town Hall. And folks, it was a sponsored concert and tribute that the funds will be used to support the Jimmy Heath Scholarship Endowment Fund at Queens College. So we certainly would like you to go to Flushing Town Hall's Facebook page. They're keeping it up there so you can see the replay of it. And I'm sure you will enjoy that very much so. Right, Mr. Clyde?
That's right.
A big time thanks again to our special guest, the amazing Michael Fitzpatrick. Clyde, we're going to have him back for part 2.
Oh, sure.
For sure. You can
He's
follow
deeply profound. Deeply profound.
You will follow him on his webpage at www.michaelfitzpatrick.com. Don't forget to join us next week when our special guest is going to be theater costume designer and 30-year vet of the Phantom of the Opera, Mr. Ron Blakely, who will bring his unique ideas and his new unique vision of what it's like back behind the scenes of one of the most famous shows of all time, Phantom of the Opera. Stay advised on all the events by following the Josephine Foundation on our Facebook page and Instagram account. On behalf of my co-host, Mr. Clyde Bullard, our producer, Gio Vitozzi, and myself, peace, strength, and love until we see you again next week on Odds and Ends, Life, Entertainment, Theater, and the Arts. Good night, everybody.